Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. I'm your host, Sharlee Dixon. Joining me today is Laura Doerflinger Schneider, LMHC. Laura is a dedicated mental health therapist with over 31 years of experience in counseling children, adolescents, adults, and families. As the founder and creator of Casey's Clubhouse, Laura has developed an engaging animated series designed to help children ages 6 to 12 navigate social emotional challenges with skills like regulation, empathy, and problem solving. With a compassionate and flexible approach, Laura integrates her expertise in counseling with innovative tools to foster growth and resilience. Her work, grounded in optimism and personalized care, has made a significant impact on many lives, providing valuable support through both individual therapy and her creative educational series. We're excited to have Laura with us today to discuss the inspiration and development behind Casey's Clubhouse and its impact on children's social emotional learning. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Awesome. I'm really glad to speak with you. So, Laura, as we get started today, what was the initial inspiration behind creating Casey's Clubhouse? And how did your background in mental health influence its development?
So, first, I have to say that I was an undiagnosed ADD kid for the first 40 years of my development. And it wasn't until my daughter got diagnosed that I realized that was me. Even though I worked with kids who were diagnosed ADHD, somehow it didn't penetrate my brain that that was something that was going on with me. And so I found that skills building, over the years, I was just developing these skills. I would just skills, because partly because I needed them and partly because of the clientele that I was working with. What really inspired me was that I wanted to empower children. I worked a long time trying to empower adults to really work with their kids in a calm environment and to be able to think before they act and to
Yep.
have some fun and creative tools to be able to apply when they're parenting, as well as like we were saying before of like calming down and being, a calm parent. And I continued with that. However, I really wanted to work with those kids, especially kids who didn't have parents who were receptive to skills. Because by empowering them and introducing them in a lot of ways to some of the same skills I was introducing parents to, they could absorb those skills early on in their lives and have that introduction for life, right? And it would resonate with them later on in life, whether they're teenagers going to counseling and going, "Oh yeah, I remember that I do have some, you know, calming skills. I do have some narration skills to how I tell my story. I have some power over the way that I deal with my life." So it was really, really important to me to bring that to children. And I saw it as a parent, I saw it as a Girl Scout leader and a volunteer, and I saw it as a therapist, how much kids could learn. I mean, we see it when they're sitting there watching TV and they absorb, whatever, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, that's, kids can learn even intricate skills, but they need it broken down so that they can follow these steps and deal with where they are developmentally to kind of grasp these concepts.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you mentioned, it's really powerful to me. You said that you want to empower and give the children a sense of having their own power. And as a former school professional, as a school social worker, a lot of the negative behaviors that we saw were a power struggle. Students wanted to do the things and to have the power to do them the way they wanted to. But if we
Right.
are able to teach them positive skills, then that is how they will use that power. So that's beautiful.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And then I think you had just asked also, like, how did the mental health background influence those?
Yes.
And so, like I said, I was drawn to skills building because I was undiagnosed ADD and I needed things to help form my brain. Like I would go to school and I would procrastinate homework and I would, overcommit because I couldn't see the bigger picture. I remember at the beginning of of every quarter, I would have this perfectly organized backpack. Oh, it looks so good, and people would be kind of impressed with my organization, but within a week, it was all chaos, right? Because I couldn't that's not how my brain organized. And so I gathered most of my information through listening and audio visual and some reading, but reading was also could be scattered for me depending on how my brain was working that day. And so when I went through school, I got my master's of science, which meant that I got to learn how to do research. I learned how to read research. I learned how to focus on methods and how do we know something works. And it was really important to me if I'm going to apply something, a skill, if I'm going to apply a therapy or a technique, that it is well received. That this is something that has shown that it is powerful to people. And I think when I went into private practice, it was even more important to me because we have these parents paying for this therapy and they expect
Mhm.
some sort of return.
Yes.
But when I graduated, the most formative part was that I became a crisis counselor through this family reconciliation program in our state. And I went house to house
Wow.
into families' homes who were in crisis. And from, little kids all the way to teenagers, I could do mall therapy. Like I could walk around the mall with a kid and develop that rapport. So maybe that I could
Mhm.
help reach them. But it was hard, and it was the home builders program that I started with, which was a company that ran behavioral health. It had this wonderful skills building, interviewing booklet that just helped, kind of organize how to go into a family in crisis. So again, I was reinforced with these skills through my education and then through this experience. And of course, when you open a private practice, which I did, several years later, you bring in these kids and it's a little different, right? You're not going into a home of crisis. You have to
Mhm.
be able to take that time. You have to be able to create that, environment where they feel safe and they feel heard. And you have that empathy. And then you can really find out where they need you, right?
Mhm.
And at the end of every session, I would do about 40 minutes with the child. And then the last 10 minutes, those kids would teach their parents what it is that we learned. And so it reinforced it, right? It reinforced
Mhm.
their learning. And then it brought the parent in to kind of get a clue of what we were doing and to adopt some of the same language.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Most of us spend more time at work than anywhere else doing anything else. So why not spend that time in a job you love? Introducing Triad's Jobs Marketplace, the only job site dedicated specifically to behavioral and mental health professionals. Featuring more than 1,000 open jobs from dozens of behavioral and mental health employers, and searchable by location, professional field, employment type, specialization, and more. Jobs Marketplace helps you find your next career opportunity. Full-time, part-time, or gig time, make the most of your time. To access Jobs Marketplace, register for your free professional account at hellotriad.com/BHT. That's hellotriad.com/BHT, and then click to Jobs Marketplace. If you're already a member of the Triad community, visit app.hellotriad.com/jobs. That's app.hellotriad.com/jobs. Visit us today and take your next career step tomorrow.
Nice, nice. That parental involvement is key, whether it's in a situation of private practice, like you just mentioned, the school system, everywhere, involving everybody in the entire family there is going to
Right.
create positive outcomes for students. That's amazing.
Exactly. And so in 2004, and this is years after I had been doing both crisis counseling and you know, my private practice, I met Leslie Fields, who was a school counselor, and we met through a crisis case, actually. And she's just this wonderful, and she had been doing a social skills group in Seattle with another therapist who had developed it, over years and over their experience. But she was a school counselor, and so really she used it, like you, in an educational setting rather than a therapeutic setting.
Yep.
And so as I was doing that with her and kind of following their plan, I felt like this is too behavioral. You cannot ask a child who has anxiety or, been diagnosed with autism and is expected to look at people in the eye. You just can't do that. You can't put them in that situation. It's almost, and this may be too far, but it almost does more harm than good, right?
I agree with that.
Yeah, and so you have to take it back, right? You have to rewind it to what is happening for this child. And is looking at somebody in the eye that important? Or is it looking towards a person, right? Is it
Mhm.
is it showing that you're paying attention through asking questions or having good listening skills, right? Yes, we tend to connect eye to eye in general, but that doesn't mean that's the only way. So we have to look for alternatives, right? And so you take the kid who has anxiety all the way back to where that anxiety comes from. Is it, and these are the 5 windows we use. I call them the 5 pillars we use in every single section of cases. Is it me? Is this the way that I run? Is this my personality? Is this what I'm born with? Are these my deficits, or are these my strengths? So we always have to go through the window of the individual. Then it's, what is my energy, and what is my energetic self? Am I born with this kind of rapid energy, or do I have calm energy that I actually need to bring up sometimes? You know, how is my energy affected by my environment, by my feelings, by all of that? And then you do have to go into feelings. Like, we all have similarities in terms of our visceral experience of emotions, right? But we also have similarities. And so, how do we identify those things? And by identifying them, then how do we work on them so that they benefit us or reflect the reality of what situation we're in? And then, of course, cognitive behavioral background thoughts, right? Dealing with your own narration, dealing with your story, dealing with what we tell ourselves and how to stop it when it runs amok. And then, of course, behavior, right? Because we know behavior is important, not only in the end result, the result that people see, right?
Mhm.
So that's why we focused on behavior, because that was what we could see. That was obvious. But behavior is not only the end result, but it's also a skill that we can use to manage our emotions, our energy, our thoughts, and our perception. So they're all important in the treatment. And that's what I found, is that's what I was doing in individual counseling. That is what I was starting to bring to the social skills group that I was running with her. And at some point I just was like, I can't keep doing this program. I mean, the more power to you. It had backup. There's lots of great evidence on behavioral programs, but I didn't think that it was therapeutic enough.
Understood. Understood. And so you kind of gave us just a little bit of Casey's Clubhouse, the 5 pillars. Can you give us a bit more of an overview of the program and how it helps children, ideal age, who facilitates it? Give us all the info.
Yes. Okay. So what I ended up developing was a 30-week program. That was the initial intention because I was running social skills therapeutic groups. And Leslie came with me. Leslie was very supportive of what I was doing. And so we started using Casey's Clubhouse in about 2015 when I had developed the base of it. So it was 30 lessons with 6 sections of basically essential skills or foundational skills. And then every section went through the 5 basic pillars, me, energy, emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. So you had those 5 lessons. So you came through those perspectives. And one of the inspirations for the 5 perspectives, actually, my dad is an Episcopalian minister. And I had a really hard time saying, well, being an Episcopalian is the right way, and he wasn't like that. He wasn't like that at all. But sometimes you almost felt like that had to be the way. That was the only way, and so other people were wrong. And it's like, no. My dad said there are many windows to God, and all of these religions, in a way, are different windows to God. And I loved that. And I thought, when I was writing this, I thought, well, there are different windows, right? There are different ways that we can manage and reflect who we are by addressing these 5 things, right? And they just become more visual when you name them, right? Because especially kids need that a little bit more exactness.
Mhm.
And then, so that's how I rotated through the 6 sections. I started out with regulation, of course, because regulation is needed in a group if you're running a group, but
Mhm.
it's also needed in order to learn. So the regulation section goes first. We go through all 5 of the pillars, and then we go to awareness. And I used awareness next because once you can kind of manage some of, or you get the concept of managing, that you have some influence over regulating yourself, your energy, your emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, then you can start dealing with your awareness, opening that up. And we use mindfulness within that section, but we don't have the section because awareness is similar, but it's also almost bigger, right? And so we really worked on helping kids get clued into themselves, their community, to kind of break out of just seeing themselves, those who could, and see other people, right? And then we went to determination. And I believe through all the years that I have worked as a therapist, motivation is essential, right? And so I use the idea of a determination, like, how do we use our motivation to determine where we're going, right? And make some makes put into our minds things like, we do a little thing called friends wanted, right? And we do a wanted poster kind of thing,
Yeah.
for what type of friend do you want, what you know things that kids haven't necessarily thought about, right?
Right.
They kind of react instead of act, and so we're
Mhm.
trying to help them focus on their action. Now, mind you, none of this was necessarily direct social skills. They were deeper than that in a way, because the behavior that's coming out of them are the social skills, right? And, once we went to determination, we went to problem solving. Now we're like going, okay, let's dig in here because you're a little bit more defined in a way within this social setting. And now we can talk about things like problem solving. And problem solving is really about rights and responsibilities and friendship. And how do you see those? Right. And
Mhm.
then confidence was the second to last one, because now you're using these things. And one of the, confidence is all about the evidence that you can do something, right? Confidence, self-esteem is all based on action.
Yep.
And when I stop and I look back on my life, right, I can go, oh, like today, I'm a little bit nervous, I want my brain to be right and organized. But I know in the past that I have done interviews, I have talked in front of people, so I can use that to give me confidence today, right? Which decreases my stress. And that's part of what we're teaching kids in the confidence section is that you now know some skills, you've been using some skills, you have skills inherently also, right, from your life so far. And so we beef that up. And then the mastery section is the last section where kids reflect on what they've learned and they teach it to their peers. And it is a beautiful, beautiful section. So all of these we found took us through the flow of learning social emotional skills, social emotional literacy, mental health intervention, and it just made such a big difference in kids' lives.
Absolutely. Okay. I have a quick question for you. So you mentioned it is like a flow situation. So we start in the beginning and then move towards mastery. Is it possible or is it a good idea or a bad idea, I guess, to start in one area? Let's say I'm working specifically with a child who I know has confidence issues, self-esteem things going on. Should we start at the beginning or just jump right in at where we know the issue is?
Right. Well, like I said, originally that's how I developed it. But then, you look at the regulation section, it stands alone. The awareness section stands alone. The mastery section didn't stand alone, but now it does because that is really for peer leaders, right? It's a great section for that. And I rewrote it to where it would reflect peer leadership and that feeling of I can do this, right? I can intervene, I can be a voice, I can be an advocate. So so we have developed each section to stand alone because I thought, of course, that people would be like, oh, a year-long program, that's great, the curriculum. But a lot of people cannot even conceive committing to a 30-week
Yeah.
program. So we, basically made each section solid on its own.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then what we realized is that the videos themselves, if you give context, like, okay, we're going to watch a video where this kid, Casey, and his friends are kind of like midway through school and they're having some problems, kind of like what I hear you and your friends having. So let's take a look at Casey's story and the lesson and see what we can talk about. So it's a really great, not only teaching skill, but ice breaking skill to use in therapy. And so you can use them all by themselves.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
I appreciate that adaptability because, like you said, 30 weeks, it is excellent, but it also is kind of daunting
Yes.
or a therapeutic relationship to think it's going to take us 30 weeks to achieve a certain level of mastery, even if I know we need to work on these specific skills along the way.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. When I watched Casey's work, like the curriculum, the stories, and at first some of the stories I wrote the same day as our group because that is how I worked, right? My brain was alert when I was under pressure.
Yeah.
And so I would write them, I'd print them, I'd bring them in. And then in the older group, we just have the kids read it. So they'd pass the story around and read it, read different paragraphs. And eventually I found that if I recorded them and basically had some little bear tell them the story, that they would be interested. And so I put together a workbook with all the stories and all that sort of stuff. And I had my daughter-in-law, who eventually worked with me on animating this, draw out 30 chapters worth of pictures. So the bear would be telling the story and the kids would be drawing in their characters. So all the characters were black and white because, of course, they were coloring them in to suit whatever it is that they visualized. And so that was, kind of fun. And then I went and started wanting to animate it. And when we animated, I found that it was just like the best way to teach these kids. The audio visual was learning was just amazing. So that's kind of how we progressed. And so it just helped kids relate and go through the process, having some fun, being silly, being able to watch these characters go through a year-long story.
Absolutely. Speaking of characters, can you tell us more about Casey and the other characters in the series? So, how did you develop them and what roles do they really play in helping children navigate social situations?
Yeah. So for years, I heard children's stories, right? I heard what pains they were having. And mind you, this is in my area, right? It is children who were around, the Kirkland, Washington area, Lake Washington School District, which is a fabulous school district. There was a variety of social and economic differences, but for the most part, this was a pretty, relatively safe area. It was a relatively fluent area. It was relatively, most of those kids are going through a lot of kind of common social issues. And I took a lot of my stories, or the ideas of those stories from my experience with that, and then my experience of, 11 years doing the other social skills group. I had contact with kids that were in Seattle as well as, up north and south of us, but I was always very aware that my observation and my experience was limited to what I was exposed to. So when I was writing the characters, I knew I couldn't get through to everybody. I knew I couldn't, I couldn't bring in perspectives that I didn't have. So I was very, very aware of that. And I thought a lot about like, how do I form these social situations to where they model some good skills, but they're not so specific that, kids wouldn't relate, that there was relatable influence in those. And I worked with a lot of therapists and school counselors to kind of bring in stories. So then I developed Casey as the main kid. And actually, when I used the name Casey, I wanted a non-binary name. I even thought about how could I write this in a non-binary way just so that both, all kids could kind of relate to the main character, but I just couldn't. I couldn't figure out how to do that. And so I decided Casey would be a boy because 70% of our groups were boys, right? There was a lot of I think a lot of ADHD sort of challenges that you saw with boys that you didn't see with girls who, often don't have the hyperactive piece. So they're not as visual, until they get older and they're in chaos because there's too much on their plate.
Yep.
And so, but Casey's best friend is Bridget. And then we have Isaac and Daniel and Samantha and Samay and Joe. So we have kind of a wide variety of kids and they have different backgrounds. So like Casey has a really great mom and dad and a little sister, but he is in a pretty safe and educated environment. And so he gets the help of his parents, his teachers, his principal, throughout the year. So I really wanted to model good parenting and I wanted to model good leadership at school. So Casey has some social anxieties and, wants friends and is disconnected from the beginning of the year until he meets Bridget, who is much more forward and, basically said, "You're gonna be my friend from day one." But she struggles with anger management. So she has blowouts and she's this like lovely creative kid, but then can be super demanding about, how we play and what we do. And then Isaac, Casey's other best friend, is ADHD and very hyperactive, and kind of dealing with the glory of ADHD and that sort of like beautiful, kind of creative and fun and sometimes outgoing person, as well as when the hyperactivity gets out of control and how do you bring it back? And Isaac deals with a lot of like rejection because his energy explosions will, get him to where maybe he's not invited back to a house. So we have that going on. We have Samantha actually is a very neutral character, but in terms of gender. And so we really wanted to affirm not, we know that Samantha is a she, identified in fourth grade, right, as a she, but that we didn't want to dress her girly, or we didn't want to, we wanted to show that tomboy quality of a kid. And then, she has this attachment to Bridget that then causes conflict and can be kind of like, a mean girl kind of idea. So she can bring in that kind of conflict. And then we have Daniel, who is in fifth grade, and he sometimes is a bully. And he has his own group, but he meets Casey and they kind of connect. But then Casey starts to see the bullying behavior. And it was really important for me to deal with bullying because it was all over. Everybody who's mean to you is a bully. So like when we go into problem solving section, we have 4 quadrants of basically a problem or social problems, where we have like mean behavior, or hurtful behavior, which is what we sometimes do with friends. We hurt their feelings or whatever, but we get over it and we can kind of deal with that. And we have mean behavior, which is not physically threatening, but can be a poke and poke and poke and poke, and kind of can feel like that almost bullying behavior. And it can be, right? But it's kind of in a different realm of how we deal with it. And then we have outbursts. And I thought of this one because my son would have these problems with another kid who was ADHD, and this kid could throw rocks at him or throw rocks at other people, but it was an outburst. It wasn't really directed. He wasn't targeted. And then we have harassment. And harassment really is that bullying behavior where there's power over, you're targeted, and you have some level of control or influence. So that's one of the reasons why I picked all of those characters, so we could go and deal with some of these issues.
Nice. And I appreciate that the characters all seem to be different types of children, dealing with different types of issues, and they look all different. So that really brings in that you're encompassing and working with all types of children, because I don't know very many schools that just have one type of child in them, or one area.
Exactly. Right. No, nobody has that. That's for sure.
No, I don't know in any part. Maybe there is, and I missed it, but not in any part or school that I've ever worked in. No
Exactly.
child, even the children that all may look the same, still
Right.
all deal with different things or have different personalities for sure.
Exactly. For sure. Yep.
So what types of techniques does the series use to help children stay engaged? Because trying to put children that have lots of these different behavioral issues, try to keep them engaged in a small group. I've been there. It's not easy at all. No matter how small or large the group is, it's hard to do. So what types of techniques does the series use to keep children engaged? And then also, while engaged, make those complex social emotional concepts accessible and memorable?
Right, exactly. I was comparing this to a behavioral program that I've been a part of, right? And now I have a much more integrated program, therapeutic program.
Right.
And what I found was, by writing the stories, the kids were more engaged by listening to them, and then eventually the videos. But I structured it, and this is actually if a therapist or school counselor or even parent, because I do want to say we have access for parents. Parents can do this at home with their kids. They can sit and they can watch the videos. We have activities and discussion questions and everything available to them to where they can bring this into their homes. And it's a great program for parents, especially who have relatively socially adjusted kids, right? So that they're learning skills that can also help them. Everybody needs that support, right? And so parents who are like, well, my kid's doing fine with friends, that's not what this is all about, right? That's part of what this is all about, but this is also about mental health, right? And being able to help your kids become aware of mental health and mental health skills. And these, in a way, the pillars that I find most important for us to look at learning and changing, and accepting, right? It's not all about change, it's about acceptance.
That's true.
So when you kind of come back to how professionals can use it, I put together basically lesson plans for every single lesson, every single session that they can use or not use. But I basically put it together exactly how we used it. And so
Nice.
what we found, mind you, we are working with ADHD kids and kids who have been diagnosed with autism and anxiety. Every once in a while, we'll have a really conscientious parent that's just like, I just want my kids to learn these skills, right? And so they would come in and bring a different level of, interest. And I think it helped them open their eyes to different kids. But we dealt with a lot of like kids especially in the first 5 weeks where they're, hiding under their table or
Yep.
they're, being rude or
Mhm.
they're distracting or whatever. And so, like with anything, creating that safe and comfortable and empathetic environment was really essential to me. Leslie came from the school, so there was a lot more kind of punishment based discipline, right?
Mhm.
And for me, and some of that was necessary, and I didn't have that skill. And for me, even as a parent, I was much more empathetic and tried to use play and creativity to help my kids along the way. And therapeutically, I did too. And that's what I taught parents. So I wanted it to be really empathetic because we've got kids here who, if they blow out, usually they're gone. We give up on them, they're done, right? But that's not how I wanted to approach it. I wanted to approach it as being able to kind of take that time, have them bring themselves together in different ways. So you always have the two facilitators because one facilitator will have to take a kid out of the room and help them calm down and re-engage. We had it structured and the kids knew the structure and they would come in and they would gong the bell in and say, Casey's Clubhouse officially begins. So they knew they were part of something special. And we use tokens to kind of see friendly behaviors and see people who are on track. And we said these tokens are for a prize at the end. We always gave a prize at the end. These tokens are for the things that are difficult for you. So if you really have a hard time paying attention and you go off track, we just are going to encourage you to get back on track. And that's how you get a token. So we created that environment and they would do a sharing, and then we would move on to the lesson in the movie. So the movie gave us this great way because they were excited. So they would move from their seats to the floor and sit around and we'd watch this movie that was about averages at about 8 minutes. And then the lesson averages probably about 5 minutes. And so, they would come, they would sit, they would, get into this story and into this lesson. And they just did. Like all of these ADHD and, other diagnoses but all these kids who had this energy would sit down and watch. They were interested. They wanted to know what Casey did next. And that's one of the reasons why having a story arc is really helpful, right? Having that story arc so that they are following along and they want to know what's going on next.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's how they really engage. And that's what we give counselors or other professionals who want to use the program. They can take those lesson plans and they can build them as they do. We have, after the movie, we have a little lesson and then an activity. And that lesson and activity is reinforcing what we just learned on the video. And the activity could be arts and craft, it could be acting, it could be a game, it could be all sorts of things, role playing. And then we would move into what we called snack and chat. But we would sit around and, then we would let them play and hopefully start to play the skills, right? And to show those
Right.
skills. And then we gather back together and end. About 75 minutes. Well, not everybody has 75 minutes. And so we've definitely taken the skills and and the lesson plans and made them into smaller sections so that they can, you know, follow something that's more realistic for them.
Right.
But it was all, it was essential. And so it's the movement, right? It's going from this spot to that spot to something that's really engaging, like the stories, and then to an activity that's engaging, and then to play, and then to end. And back to your parents. And when we created the videos, we found that the kids would talk about Casey like a person. It was great. It was like, I was saying to Rachel this morning, who's my daughter-in-law, who has helped me through all of this, is that I remember this mom coming in and telling me a story that she was frustrated the other day. And she said, and my kid came up to me and said, "What do you think Casey would do, Mom?"
That's awesome.
Yes.
That's
you
awesome.
know, we win. Yay. So it was delightful to see that engagement.
Absolutely, absolutely. And two things that really stuck out to me as you were speaking just now about being engaging and working and helping the children bring it in, lesson plans. So as a person who has worked in a school system before, a lot of teachers or a lot of educators, me as as a school social worker as well, doing groups, you're like, man, I got to come up with something else. Like, oh,
Yes.
I don't really have time in my day to create a plan for this, and I want to do these things with my kids, but I don't know like how to do it or how to get it across. So having a lesson plan that is made for you with the tools and the before and the after, that is amazing. And then
Thank
also
you.
the parental piece. I was going to ask you, or mention that in my experience, educators can work super hard on developing
Yeah.
skills at school, but then when our babies go home to, to their families of origin, a lot of that is lost. And so
Yes.
being able or hearing that students are able to work on some things at home and then
Mhm.
also take those skills and really use it on their parents too is amazing. Yes.
It is. And of course, I wrote basically a parenting workbook that went along with all of these. So, and I didn't necessarily reteach the skill that I taught their kid, but I justified it through some of the research that we know, some of the experience, and also then challenged them on change and how do we change, and I would educate them about change and kind of my 5 pillars within the situation or environment, right, which are important, so that they could start to understand not only how complex change is for their children, but also how complex it is for them, and to kind of break it down so that they could start doing some things that would resonate with the program, calmer parenting and play and creativity and connection.
Nice. So, what kind of feedback have you heard from parents, therapists, educators, children? How is the effectiveness? Is it working to improve children's social skills?
Yeah, so when I created a therapeutic tool, which was an assessment tool, and it was based a lot on what Castle has done. And Castle
Mhm.
is the collaborative for academic social emotional learning. And one of the things that they asserted, along with other research, which I also read, and they're based on behaviors because they're based on what we can see. We can only
Mhm.
assess what we can see.
Yep.
So, engagement, self control, empathy, cooperation, communication, assertion, and responsibility. So, these were kind of my guiding lights when I was developing the skills and making sure that I was addressing these things. And they were the basis for the assessment I wrote, where we would look at engagement, like somebody who is engaged one-on-one, but falls back, when they're in a group, right? That could just be part of who they are. And so they may need some social skills to be able to manage a group, but they really have some strong social skills one-on-one, right? And
Yeah.
so starting to kind of look at where they were before the group. So we would do this assessment. I would give it to the parents. I would give it to any counselors or teachers that were involved in the case. And I would do one kind of like 4 weeks in or 5 weeks in so that I had a base. And then I would do it mid-year so then I could address whatever maybe we were missing. And then we would do it at the end of the year and have parents do it at the end of the year. Now, mind you, this was not, I know research and this wasn't research. However, it was a very important therapeutic tool and gave me a lot of good feedback. So we would hear from parents and we'd hear from the school counselors and the teachers and other professionals that were working, that they saw these differences in the kids. And when you're taking a kid from age 9 to age 10, you are applying a program and they're developing. So, there's always going to be like crossover in terms of
Yep.
what the effectiveness is if we could take age out of it or development out of it. But we were very, very encouraged, and I was encouraged. So basically, we were finding that this was working. And when COVID hit, all groups stopped, right?
Right.
And this actually, in 2019, I had hired my daughter-in-law, Rachel, who has a very linear mind, by the way. She's lovely. She has very linear thinking. And she came in and helped animate. And, she had drawn these characters like 5 years before. And now she's helping me animate them so that we can tell these stories. And I had animated them before, but it was terrible. But the kids liked it, but it was terrible. So once we started kind of putting all of those stories together in this kind of audiovisual way, we found that children were more receptive, but we used our black and white characters against a color black background. And all of a sudden we were like, how are people going to receive, partly it's, they look like little ghosts in a way, right? And so you've got kids that at first are like, what is going on here, But we really wanted kids to be able to reflect whatever they reflected, right? Whatever they saw, they could reflect. We weren't trying to determine what they would reflect. We weren't so egotistical that we thought that they would reflect themselves necessarily, but maybe they would reflect a friend or they would, but we went through a company called Cultures Connecting. And there's a brilliant psychologist there, Dr. Hollis, who reviewed it for us. So we sent over 8 of the videos and she reviewed it because we wanted to make sure that we were being culturally sensitive. And she, was able to catch things that maybe we were doing that came from our own biases, and Daniel still is like this, but Daniel is a bigger guy and he has a little bit of heft to him. And, she would kind of point out, well, that is kind of a stereotype. And you stop and you go, well, we've already designed Daniel, but we need to be very, very aware of that as we, continue on. And it just allowed us to check ourselves in putting this program out there. But she was like, oh, I think all kids need this. How about if you get a hold of, Nickelodeon or PBS? And I'm like, that would be great, except that, of course, for me, it was like, but those are, and I think it's great for unsupervised kids to be, well, not unsupervised, but lightly supervise kids when they're
Mhm.
learning from certain programs. That's great. But I really, really wanted this as a therapeutic tool and an educational
Absolutely.
tool.
Mhm.
And so I didn't want to go down that road, but I liked the comment.
Thanks. Because I mean, honestly, I was thinking the same. Like, it gives me kind of Daniel Tiger vibes, but with real children, so I can really
Right.
see it working. But I absolutely agree with you that some things need to be more on the therapeutic side, and it sounds like this is one of them. Earlier, we talked about your website, so I took a second to to look at the Casey's Clubhouse website. Excellent website, guys. You should check it out. It does have some free resources and some other things on there. And one of the things that I mentioned to you was the Casey's Carpool Parenting podcast.
Uh-huh.
And so it sounds like a new project, maybe some expansion. Can we talk a bit more about expansion for Casey's Clubhouse and what
Yeah.
can viewers look forward to?
Yes. So it's important to note that we are a family business. I have hired family to help me do so much of this, but I have like all these wonderful consultants around, all these other therapists that have helped and who have replicated cases. So we don't have a big team. We have a small team. And so my ideas come faster than my ability to work. And so the Casey's Carpool is a podcast that I really want to do. It's like we started it and we started recording and started putting those things together. But bringing that parent education to parents, especially while they're driving to and from, seems like it would be quite helpful. And so that is probably one of the things we'll be expanding on this year. We've done some social media, little TikTok videos Rachel talked me into. And of course, I'm
Good
like,
job, Rachel.
I'm too old for TikTok, but I'm not. And so we did a lot of that and didn't get a lot of pickup on it. And so we focused more on going out and doing the professional conferences and revising certain things to where therapists could use the smaller, sections or any one of the 6 sections independently and then focused on kind of the independent lessons that therapists could also pull from. So we've kind of put that all together. And so now it's like, okay, what else can we add and do? Part of what I really want in my big picture is that, first of all, we have professional users that are helping and giving us feedback and getting in touch with us, but also that we have different voices. And so one of my hopes is that as we develop that we can pull just like I did years ago. I started this parent education group where I found all these wonderful therapists that were in practice, that were doing the work. They weren't educators per se, they were actually in the trenches,
Yeah.
and I had
Mhm.
them put together parent education classes and I would go and I would get them into schools and I did the same. Well, for me, it's because there are so many voices, I don't have the only voice. And so bringing in other therapists and educators from different walks of life who want to address specific areas. Like I had somebody who wanted to do a trauma series, and somebody who wanted to do a foster care series, and that is like ultimate for me is that if we can get those stories and then maybe get real animators, and hire more people, then we can animate those and have them available. So, like the professional membership is like $199, and everything we ever create will be in there. We're not going
Wow.
to be selling for another 59. You can have this
Mhm.
section or this section.
Add on.
Exactly. We're just going to continue to develop and have that be available. We really wanted to make it a reasonable amount. And so, like private practitioners who start a group, they would probably make $26,000 a year. So the 199 is nothing, right? It within that cost. And they would,
Right.
basically license the material with that membership every year.
Okay. Nice. Thank you for that. And as we wind down today, first of all, I'm really enjoying our conversation, but we do have to come to a close. So as
Yes.
we wind down today, can you remind our listeners where they can learn more about Casey's Clubhouse and where they can learn more about your program in general?
Yes. So we're at Casey's-clubhouse.com. So you can go directly there and then you can kind of see there where to go to learn more. There's a bunch of information. Like you said, there's free information.
Mhm.
And then we have an Instagram at Learn with Casey. We have Facebook. You can search Casey's Clubhouse. Same with TikTok. It's at Casey's Clubhouse. And same with on YouTube. On a lot of those, you'll see the kind of clips that I did for just learning about, how do we help our kids learn about positive and negative thinking, or, how do we, know how to use the breathing tool and get our kids engaged to be able to actually use that, let alone help use that skill. So you have a lot of those, but on Casey's-clubhouse.com, you will see like the whole program. And whether you're a parent and you want to bring that home to your kids, that membership's just $129 because, they're not going out there and, selling it as a program, and
Mhm.
so theirs is less. And then the professional membership, any professional who works with kids can use that program. And they have to determine whether they're qualified to use it therapeutically or educationally. And then they can augment it the way that they see fit. So I really wanted to put that into professional hands and just allow them to use their professional education to find their audience.
Nice, nice. Well, Laura, I really have appreciated speaking with you today. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm hoping that our listeners are able to take this program and use it not just in their practices, but also at home with their children and their families.
Right. Thank you so much. I have enjoyed it.
At And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us. The resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.